You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Episode 126, The Paradox.
Welcome to The Paradox with your attending, Dr. Eric Larson. He is a practicing anesthesiologist and clinical assistant professor at Michigan State University College of Human Medicine. Listen in as he takes you behind the scenes of what practicing medicine in today's ever-changing world is like with another doctor. The Paradox is a fun and accidentally informative show for physicians, patients, or anyone who has ever found themselves in a waiting room.
Welcome to The Paradox. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Larson. Thank you for joining me as we explore the U.S. medical system in a fun and informative format through expert analysis. Today's expert is Chuck Kroll. Chuck is a forensic accountant, and he has been studying the MOC, or Maintenance of Certification issue, with relation to the various specialty medical boards for quite some time. You might have heard about this as we've had some episodes on this earlier, but quite a long time ago. But maintenance of certification is critical to physicians being able to practice their trade in hospitals and outpatient settings. If you don't have certification, you are unable to really practice medicine. That's not entirely true. There are some instances where you can work around the system, but if you want to work within the major system, which includes insurance companies and hospitals, you have to be board certified. This causes essentially a regulatory capture system, in which case you're forced to participate through a single entity, and they can charge whatever amount of money they want, and they can actually have you do whatever they want as far as requirements to maintain your certification. This is a bad system. It's got lots of problems, and we're going to discuss that in the show, but we're going to discuss basically the corruption that goes along with this. If you're a physician, this is something that you know, but you're going to get a lot more details today. If you're a patient or someone who is around medicine, this is going to give you a better idea of what the physicians face. And this is really driving a lot of the problems within medicine as far as physicians retiring early, leaving the profession. And I think this is something that affects all of us. And so I think we should have a general understanding of what's going on. And what you can do about it, hard to say exactly. I mean, there's going to be some funding that you can help with the efforts of Chuck Kroll and others who are working to combat maintenance certification problems. But the important thing is to know what the problem is and recognize it, understand it. And then from there, we can figure out solutions, because I'm not going to pretend to have the solutions, but I'm sure someone out there will have a way of figuring this out. This is a little bit longer interview because it's so in-depth and extensive, so I will keep my comments brief. You can find show notes, links to further details and information that Chuck Kroll talks about at theparadox.com/126. But before we go to the show, a word from our sponsor. Today's sponsor is Physician Financial Services, a business widely recognized in the physician community for disability insurance. Lawrence B. Keller, CFP, has been in the insurance and financial services industry since 1990. Unlike medicine, which has a standardized path that physicians must take to gain to the education, training, and experience requirements necessary to obtain board certification, the insurance and financial services industry does not. While he might not be a doctor's first phone call regarding their insurance needs, he's often their last. Find Larry at drpodcastnetwork.com/Larry Keller or at the link in the description of the show. Now on to the show, how medical boards are fleecing America's doctors. Enjoy. Well, hey, I'm here with my new friends, Chuck Kroll and Liz Tremblay. We're going to talk about MOC, and for those who don't know the terminology, we'll kind of go through some of the lingo. MOC is short for Maintenance of Certification. If you're a physician, you are painfully aware of what maintenance certification is. If you're a layperson, you probably have never heard of it before. And these two individuals have been working tirelessly to expose the corruption of the MOC process. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we'll talk about MOC briefly, and maintenance certification is where you're initially certified for such specialty. After you finish your residency training, you go and you get specialized training certification in whatever the specialty is. Mine is anesthesia. My wife's pediatrics. People know family practice, obstetrics, neurosurgery. Everybody has their own specialty. And that used to be for life, and then in the 90s that changed. And then your certification was time dependent, so it would actually expire after a certain amount of time if you didn't actually recertify and fulfill certain requirements. Generally at the time it was a simple test, and most people would pass the test as long as they could speak English, and then they would pay some fee. And so this is a way, I think, for hospitals to verify that you were who you said you were if you like move to a different state and then you said, hey, I'm a neurosurgeon, they'd have some sort of way of checking and verifying that you were actually a neurosurgeon, you finished training. Anyway, this of course has accelerated in the last 20 years, and now it's become a very expensive endeavor, and it takes a lot of time. And I just, as an example, mine's about $10,000 for every 10-year cycle. So I average about $8,000 a year, probably, as far as travel and all the different components I have to pay for. And it becomes more and more expensive. And so we're going to talk about sort of how this happened and why this is a problem. But again, thanks for starting, Chuck. And if you want to start, for one thing, you're a forensic accountant is what you sort of describe yourself. I'm kind of curious what that is, but then also just give your background, I guess, and how you sort of came up with that title.
Forensic accountant was really a self-description. I'm a certified public accountant. When I was with Minnesota Specialty Physicians a little over 20 years ago, I got involved in digging through some public records with one of the large health plans that we had a contract with, and we were the umbrella group for about 50 specialty clinics, different specialties in the state of Minnesota. So it was really not the traditional accounting, month-end close, that type of thing, and it was more investigating what's going on, looking for financial reporting anomalies. Typically, when the word forensic accountant comes up, it's in the public's mind, they might think it's somebody testifying in court. I've never testified in court. What I've been doing with the specialty boards more recently is what I would consider forensic accounting work, looking for financial reporting anomalies, chasing down leads, pursuing things that don't feel right, don't look right. I have enough experience where I can pretty quickly sniff out, are they cooking the books? As it turned out in Minnesota, I worked behind the scenes with the Attorney General, and he launched an investigation against this payer that we were negotiating with that was pleading poverty. And through my analysis that was vetted by attorneys within the Attorney General's office, they concurred with my findings. A lot of my findings were inserted word for word in the final report that the Attorney General issued. Anyway, long story, there was a number of lawsuits the Attorney General filed against, it was Medica and Allina Health System was the system up in Minnesota. What was happening was that the health plan was in fact hiding profits, which should probably come as no surprise to most of your listeners. And it was quite simple, almost comical what they were doing from an accounting point of view. They probably thought, well, no one understands these reports that they were filing annually with the state, or no one's going to look at them, or even if they look at them, they don't care. The Attorney General thought there might be some, maybe good political benefit that came out of it. That there was a lot of hostility against health maintenance organizations in the state of Minnesota. The press was not necessarily pro-physician at the time, but they were definitely hostile to HMOs. So I had a very receptive press that I was working with behind the scenes, and I was leaking very damaging information that I discovered, which was a lot of fun. It's like, no, I don't want my name associated with this, but this is what's going on. And because of my position here, we're negotiating with this organization, as an employee at that specialty group. That story had a happy ending as far as I was concerned. Attorney General sued them. Both Medica and Allina, it broke up. The entire board of the health plan, Medica, was replaced. There was, I testified at a hearing in the Minnesota Senate Finance Committee at the conclusion of this with my recommendations for more transparency in the reporting. It was a story with a happy ending. And as far as the physicians were concerned, they saw it as a huge victory. The health plan got outed in terms of the cooking of the books, the scheming that was going on. And fast forward to 2014, when I had just gotten onto Twitter, I started, I thought, well, how can I use Twitter to promote my accounting, traditional accounting services, in healthcare, specializing in healthcare, working on the physician side, working for physicians all these years. And I started seeing tweets that were a little bit disturbing to me. The word extortion was being linked with this maintenance of certification, which I honestly had never heard of. And I'll be frank, and any non-physicians listening to this in your audience, patients, yeah, they know these boards exist. Maybe they don't know there's 24 plus ABMS but I had certainly never heard of maintenance of certification. I thought, wow, if physicians are using the word extortion, there must be something to it, because it ran contrary to, it's a very militant attitude that I was seeing, frustration among the physician community. I thought, well, what's going on here? Dr. Linda Gerges, she's a family medicine doc in New Jersey, I believe, published an article in Med City News. The title of our piece was, "Are the medical boards extorting the physicians?" I thought, oh, this is interesting. I believe she's ABM, American Board of Family Medicine. She may be an American Board of Internal Medicine. So just out of curiosity, I thought this might be fun to pursue this, bring back the glory days of Minnesota, slaying the evil dragon of Medica and Alina. I started poking around pulling tax returns for American Board of Internal Medicine, and quickly found out they had a related organization, ABIM Foundation. Much to my surprise, and maybe a little chagrin and excitement, I thought, whoa, American Board of Internal Medicine was reporting huge deficits, $40-50 million in deficits. I thought, what the hell is going on here? Are they bankrupt? Organization, well respected, at least, my perception at the time, how is this even possible? They're bringing in tens of millions in testing fees, maintenance certification, of course, certification fees for docs coming out of school. I thought, no, that can't be right. It can't be going bankrupt. Then I married the numbers that I was pulling for American Board of Internal Medicine, or ABIM, with the foundation numbers, and I quickly found out what was happening. On a consolidated basis, if you smash the two organizations together, they were not bankrupt, but they were in a financial freefall on a consolidated basis. They were worth $62 million in the year 2000. In other words, the value of both organizations consolidated was worth $62 million. By the time I was looking at the numbers, they were down to 10, 15 million. I thought, what the hell? I mean, is this possible? How could this possibly be happening, that they're going bankrupt? They're in a slow motion death spiral. That was the only way that I could describe it. And so within a week or two after sleeping on it and looking at the numbers upside down, right to left, left to right, I thought, okay, no, they are going bankrupt in slow motion. So I reached out to both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. I thought, oh, this is a fun story. I can't believe what I'm seeing. And then I see this, the foundation purchased a condo, $2.3 million, 2 blocks from their headquarters. That's, they're going bankrupt and they're purchasing a $2.3 million condo 3 blocks from their office. So I passed on my findings to both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Both picked up on the story or were very, very interested. Particularly the New York Times. It was Elizabeth Rosenthal. She was a healthcare reporter at the New York Times. And she thought, no, this can't be right. It's, how could that be? This is ABIM. They were under the leadership of Dr. Christine Cassell, very popular, a star in the healthcare community. Eventually met with Dr. Rosenthal in Chicago to go over my numbers, and she informed me that she was writing a book and would like to include some of my findings in her book, which she did, and it was published in 2017. The Wall Street Journal's angle to it was the reporter, a healthcare reporter, but not a forensic, not an investigative journalist, took the lead on that, was my contact person. She contacted ABIM and said, hey, can you give us 12 years of your audited financial statements? I've never shared this story publicly with anybody. I'm sure they thought, holy, where did that come from? Right? Okay, we're going bankrupt. We didn't want anyone to know we're going bankrupt. Keeping in mind, this is in the summer of 2014. It's my understanding that this new mock program, which was causing a lot of the indigestion with the physicians, was this new mock program that was rolled out in 2014. And there was a lot of pushback in the physician community. the Wall Street Journal emailed them and say, hey, we'd like to see, please send us 12, it's a very friendly request. Please send us 12 years of your audited financial statements, to verify really what she was looking for is, okay, is Chuck unhinged? Is he dead on? Let's see their number. Let's hear their, the side of the story from their perspective. And within a week or so, they got back to the reporter and said, well, okay, we're not going to give you 12 years. In fact, we're not going to give you any years. This is a Wall Street Journal. It is mind-boggling. They said, but what we will do, because our financials, in so many ways, I'm paraphrasing here, we will happily meet you in New York, drive from Philly to New York, and we will bring in 1 year of financial statements. And because they're so complicated, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, we're going to take it back from you. You can't keep a copy of it. You can't make a copy. You can't keep a copy. When the reporter contacted me and say, hey, they're not going to give us, I said, wait a minute. Do they know who you're, this is a Wall Street Journal. Do they know who they're talking to here? I said, okay, that was really like strapping a 16-cylinder engine on my back because, okay, they're hiding something. I'm onto something. Why would they decline to send the Wall Street Journal audited financial statements? They didn't ask for internal documents, things of that nature. They asked for the bread and butter audited financial statements. And they were refusing to provide that. And then coming up with this lame excuse, well, it's so complicated.
So you kind of stumbled into this. I mean, it sounds like you obviously had this history of following breadcrumbs, and it just sort of just became a kind of a pet project. And then when the evasiveness began, then you really became interested. Like you might have lost interest, but then they went out of their way to make sure that you stayed on them.
I'll be honest with you. I was really angry at that point. It's like, okay, I know I should probably never take any, and I don't take any of this personally, but what's going on? Do they think they could just deny that request and just walk away and no one will say anything or do anything about it? Soon thereafter, I thought, well, class action lawsuit is probably in order. So I did make some initial contacts with some class action attorneys in Minneapolis and Chicago. The law firms weren't interested at the time. I know Dr. Fisher and Dr. Marion Mass and her group, Dr. Dixon and PPA organization was instrumental in raising funds to file suit, which happened in December of 2018. But backing up to the fall of 2014, the Wall Street Journal reporter called me and said, well, what do we do? They're not going to give us any financial statements. I said, okay, this is the most ridiculous situation I've ever seen in my life, but okay, we'll deal with it. And as it turns out, in the state of Pennsylvania, where they were headquartered, the state of Pennsylvania requires nonprofits under certain circumstances to file an audit report with the state.
Okay.
So I said, okay, there you go. That's our answer. We'll go to the state. We'll get copies of the audit reports and see if they confirm my narrative that, okay, ABIM is in a slow motion financial freefall. The state was able to provide a couple years. Of course, ABIM did not know that the Wall Street Journal their reporter was reaching out to the state of Pennsylvania. She actually had to end up calling the governor's office, if you can believe it, to, shake some of the financial statements loose. Not because they were hiding anything, it's just because of the bureaucracy and so on. But we did get a couple years of older financial statements, very complete. They were, they fit with my narrative that, okay, they're in trouble. And they also gave much more information than what's available on a tax return, a Form 990, which is the tax return for a nonprofit. We said, okay, we've got 2 years worth from the state of Pennsylvania. We'll run with that. And I was hoping that the Wall Street Journal then would, at that point, run with the story. And they were dragging their feet. Again, the reporter was not an investigative journalist. I don't think she understood what this really meant, what the big picture was, what the significance of this was, what a serious story that was here. And in the meantime, ABIM was getting some pressure to publish the financial statements on their website, which in January of 2015 they did. I thought, okay, they're maybe they got rattled by the call, the previous summer from the Wall Street Journal looking for financial statements. So they're going to try to make an effort towards transparency. What they posted on their website, kind of fit in with this Keystone Cops feeling that I was getting, with that organization, was they posted a financial statement that was not complete. I thought, oh, God, I mean, this is just becoming comical. And by not complete, I mean that they filed a full set with the state of Pennsylvania, which they did not know we had a copy already. And they filed this partial financial statement. And, by that time, I'm all riled up. I'm thinking, who do they think that, honestly, can you be more stupid? Don't they know they're filing these full reports with the state of Pennsylvania, and don't they know that the public can get them? I mean, this is the Wall Street Journal that's calling the governor's office. I published an article in Med City News at the end of January in 2015 saying, hey, ABIM omitted all these key financial reports. So I wasn't going to wait around for the Wall Street Journal to run the story. And by then I was working closely with Dr. Fisher, Wes Fisher out of Chicago, who's been really at the forefront of this issue. And he had just published a huge piece, a write-up, his most popular piece ever, I believe, in December of 2014, detailing the condo and all the shenanigans going on at ABIM. So I published that story, and then within 2 weeks, ABIM posted the corrected financial statements to their website. Anyhow, that was the drama that went on between August of 2014 and February of 2015, was that, they were ABM, I felt, was always on their heels. They weren't expecting this. They didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how to handle the questions. Dr. Behrens, I don't know if you remember, did me a couple about, we made mistakes and so on and so forth. And, we'll do better next time. So at that point, they were in damage control.
So I guess, to recap, I had Dr. Fisher on way back. He was on and he went through some of these things, which are completely outrageous as far as and he just was focusing on the American Board of Internal Medicine, which is what you're talking about, the ABIM.
Correct.
Where they owned real estate. They had condominium in downtown. I think they had one in Philadelphia, I think it was, and they have one in New York City, and they had like full limo service. All their executives fly first class everywhere. And the problem, of course, is that all their revenue comes from the fees they acquire from physicians through basically a forced system, a taxation system, essentially, where you have to give revenue in order to practice, because you can't practice very easily. Let's say it's almost impossible to practice medicine without having a board certification. And so because of that, you have to pay these fees. And as they increase the fees, you just have to pay them, whatever it is. And at some point, there was a point where if you were trained early enough before the certification became time limited, you actually didn't have to pay. You were grandfathered. So it was a way all the new grads come in and they'd have to do this maintenance certification process. The older docs didn't have to because, they got in before it was time limited. But then suddenly the ABIM decided that you had to actually do it. Even if you were grandfathered, now you no longer were, and you had to pay money and you had to participate in MOC, except they knew that these docs weren't used to doing the MOC process. They're not used to the testing and all this stuff. And so they said, you know what, just give us some money and it'll be good. But if you don't pay us, you don't get it. And so that's when the docs went truly crazy, because they're like, it exposed themselves as, basically a money-making venture. And they obviously are not very clever as far as how they're hiding their money. They're not like some master thief, because it is all publicly reported, right? But they probably were under the rightful assumption that no one would ever look, right? Because most doctors are busy. No one else is going to care about it except doctors. And so that's where you come in, I guess. And so I guess, aside from those outrageous things with ABIM, give us an idea of, I guess one thing that is always confusing, and I think it's intentionally confusing, is the foundation principles, because I think every board has that they have their board, and then they have some sort of foundation, the foundation for patient safety and anesthesia or whatever it is. What is their relationship between each other? Because they always say they're separate entities, but I think what you've uncovered is that's really not the case. My
theory on the foundations, that's a good question. Why was the American Board of ABIM Foundation established? It was established in 1989. Within a month or two after, they also established a pension plan. And the pension plan is a key component to this story because in addition to tens of millions of dollars being shipped, came in the front door at ABIM through mock fees and certification fees. And then what they were doing is then shipping it out the back door to the foundation, get it off the books, so that the docs aren't saying, hey, you've got, 50 million in cash. Why are you charging us? Why do you have so much money? Why do you have so much in investments? Well, get it off the books. I mean, it was beautifully stupid, is how I would describe it. And again, I think you're correct. They thought no one's going to pay attention. No one's going to see us shipping this money out the back door. What they did curiously, and this is something that Liz Rosenthal picked up in her book, is that they ABIM Foundation reported on their tax return that was formed in 1999, which is incorrect. It was formed in 89. So and for years, at least 5 or 6 years. And they also reported the incorrect state of incorporation. Now, this might sound like trivia to your listeners, like, well, what difference does that make? In the accounting field, if you're getting the year of incorporation and the state of incorporation wrong, you're in trouble. And how many pairs of eyes look at that or should check it annually? So I thought, okay, there's some scheming going on here they didn't want the docs to know that the foundation has been around since 89, perhaps. In the meantime, between 89 and on, they started shoveling money into the retirement plan. So there was a two-pronged approach. This is my theory, that when they implemented the 10-year testing, they did the numbers and said, our revenue is going to triple, our annual revenue. When we have, if you look at the age of the docs and, so on and so forth, it's like, what are they going to do with all this cash? They're going to be awash in cash. Let's set up a foundation. Let's get the cash off the books of ABIM. They also set up the retirement plan. Let's make sure our people are well situated at retirement. To this day, I can only go back about 10 years on the retirement plans. 100% of the retirement plan donations at ABIM and also the American Board of Pediatrics, don't tell your wife this, is 100% board funded. I haven't seen that in the private sector where a company is paying 100% of pension. That's, a thing, you don't see that. But at ABIM and at the American Board of Pediatrics, the contributions to the retirement plan were 100% funded by the board. The employees did not contribute. There was no employee dollars being contributed to what you typically see now is more like a 401k arrangement. Yeah, right. There's match and so on and so forth. So to answer your question, yes, there was an explosion of foundations. I believe the American Board of Emergency Medicine, which was a topic of a MedPage Today article a few weeks ago, set up a foundation. I thought, oh, God, they're getting into the act now, a little late to the game, but better late than never. My problem with the foundation is that they haven't ever recorded any revenue, as far as I can tell from the tax returns going back nearly 20 years, from services. So in other words, it's like, I don't know, the only income that they have is from they're sitting on all this cash that in the front door at ABIM and off to them, investment income. And then they had that Choosing Wisely grants from Robert Wood Foundation and so on, which they were drunk with that money, spent money, I think that contributed to their precarious financial situation. They were spending money even in spite of shipping the money out the back door. They were shifting expenses over to the foundation. There's no economic reason in my mind to this date for the foundation.
Right. I'm looking at the information you have up on your Wikimoke, and this will be linked at the show notes page at theparadox.com. So it's wikimoke.org, so wikimoc.org. And you can find all the different boards. And so I just look at the internal medicine, and these are all from the year ending 2016. So, they're still a little bit dated because it takes a while for these returns for people to have access to them. The ABIM was worth, total board assets were $46 million. ABIM was $75.5 million. So meaning combined, they were worth $121.5 million. The CEO at that time, Richard Barron, had a compensation of $850,000. Their executive compensation was $6.3 million with employees of 283, revenue of $59.3 million. And then all the other perks and stuff, which of course, I talked about before as far as, flying first class, all that kind of stuff. And then, my American Board of Anesthesiology, that's worth $35.6 million. CEO makes $364,000, which compared to most of the other specialties actually makes less than someone who actually worked in the in the specialty field. Obviously, there aren't many internal medicine physicians who are just straight medicine who are making almost $900,000 a year. And then, as you mentioned, the pediatrics, we look at that one, and this is one that is truly horrific. So they have assets of $23.2 million. They have $12.5 million of real estate. They have this to compensate the CEO $723,000, which is probably about the equivalent of 3 pediatricians' pay. That was actually Gail McGinnis, which interestingly, she was my wife's residency director back when she was in training at the University of Iowa. They had 120 employees, $3.5 million in revenue. And it's interesting because the revenue for these boards actually is more dependent not on, I guess, what they do. It's as much as just how many members they have, right? Like, so if you're a primary care, your revenue is so much greater because there's just more people who are, family medicine docs or pediatricians versus neurosurgeons, for instance, or colorectal surgeons. And you would think ostensibly there is not much difference in how the job works, right? Like the roles are pretty similar. You have to have testing. You come up with various certification plans and stuff, but essentially you're doing the same thing. It's just you're commanding a larger budget. And so you just get more money, I guess, because you have a bigger budget. And this is money coming from physicians on the front lines who have, again, no choice really in doing this because even if their hospital said you don't have to participate in this, or let's say they said, I'm not even affiliated with the healthcare system, they still have to get paid by insurance for the most part. And insurance companies will say you have to be board certified for us to pay. Now, there are all kinds of other people, they don't, make you be board certified, but physicians, you have to be. And so as soon as you stop paying the money, you lose your board certification, you lose your career. And so you are really a hostage. And that's why docs are, for the most part, pretty upset about this, almost universally. Like, I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. It is stunning. No matter how far to the left or the right these docs are, or anywhere in the middle, it's probably 95% are very much opposed to MOC and think it's a shakedown. Now, most of them won't do anything about it because they don't feel like they feel powerless.
And there's a lot of fear of retaliation.
Absolutely.
Most of my donations on our GoFundMe, we set up a new one recently in December, but I set one up back in 2014. The docs do not want to go public, that they're supporting me, even if it's very modest. We're talking $50, $100 donations. Right. They're anonymous. There's so much fear that I feel that, okay, don't, whatever you do, don't tell anyone I'm donating to your work. I thought, oh my God, it must be terrible to be in that kind of a position. But the big issue that what's happening to your issue of this calling it a tax, or basically the docs have to pay or they're out of a job. A lot of the boards, the most notorious one is the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, who's racked up over $100 million in tax-free profits. I'm talking free and clear, $100 million from 2004 to 2018. And they just moved into their new palatial headquarters, which is really embarrassing for them. I think it's a optical nightmare. You can go on my Twitter feed and see this opulent office that they built. It's about $24 million building. So they have all this cash. No one's questioning them. No one's questioning, okay, are you really a for-profit testing organization? They're making 50 cents on the dollar for every dollar that comes in at psych and neuro. 50 cents gets dropped to the bottom line. It's a money-making machine.
Yeah.
And what are they going to do with it? They build buildings. They're not going to bonus out their executives $10 million. It has to get spent. But there's a lot of, in my report that will be updated with the new report, will be, okay, I call it excess reserves. The boards are starting to hoard the cash, as you can imagine, just taking it to the next step that you were just talking about. Okay, all this money's coming in. Costs associated with rendering these tests isn't that high. It's profitable for the boards as far as I can tell. Are they refunding the money? Are they waiving the fees for a year or two? I think Psych and Neuro can waive fees for 5 or 6 years. Nothing. Charge them nothing. And they'll be in fine shape. They're not going to go anywhere. They can get zero money coming in from their docs and still be in solid financial conditions. So that issue of these excess reserves is very disturbing. That's the consequence. And that was an issue that came up with radiology recently, was, okay, why are you holding so much in reserves? 25 million, I believe, was the number. It's just a ridiculous amount of money. It's captive money. It's like an annuity check, payments coming in. There's no risk. You don't need to be hoarding 3 years worth of revenue, for some financial disruption. The money's coming in. That part of the report will be updated, but I believe in 2016, the amount of excess money was pushing $750,000 in excess money. In other words, the boards could theoretically refund $750 million in cash to the physician community and still be and not be a threat to their financial integrity.
So I think a good way of looking at that is, if it was a publicly traded corporation, no publicly traded corporation would have 2 or 3 years of revenue that they would be sitting on. They would either reinvest it in their company, provide more services, or provide it for a lower price or something like that, like you said, or give it back give it to the shareholders or something. Because it immediately makes you, for one thing, makes you target for being purchased by someone, a takeover. But to your point, I mean, you look at the salary for the head of the psychiatry and neurology was almost $960,000. I don't think there's a single neurologist or psychiatrist who makes anywhere close to that. And these are people who are commanding these gigantic salaries. And to your point, all they're doing is they're just credentialing people. So this is a nonprofit corporation, yet they're acting. I mean, this is totally a shakedown. I mean, the fact that you sit on that much money, and I know just looking at my small neighborhood association, which this actually is pertinent, right? So we actually have a sinking fund to fund the road, right? So that when our roads, we need to repave our roads, we have this money. But what happens is people just see this gigantic pile of money sitting there and just gets bigger and bigger every year. And they're like, we could replace the lampposts and stuff. Why don't we do that? We got all this money. Or we could repaint everyone's mailbox or whatever it is. And before you know it, that money is like, it's a siren calling to them that they have to spend it.
Yes.
And you can't really, there's no lockbox, right, for these guys. But to our neighborhood's point, we at least have something we're saving for. These boards are saving for, as you mentioned, it's hard to know what it is because they have a guaranteed revenue stream. They can cut their fees in half and they'd be fine. So why wouldn't they do that except that they are just greedy and there's no one who can stop them because as physicians, we have no power over this. And to this point, I'll talk about briefly, my wife's a pediatrician. There was someone who ran for the president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. These specialty boards or specialty societies are separate from the boards. They are completely separate.
Right.
But they have a relationship with each other now because if you want to get educational components that qualify for your master's certification, well, it makes sense that you get it through your specialty society. These specialty societies see that their revenue is basically just coming from membership. But wouldn't it be nice if we could then sell more of our products, our educational products, and if we're forcing people to buy this stuff, it's even better for our organization. So someone from the American Academy of Pediatrics, I do not recall his name, ran as for president of the AAP, and not the usual. If you're familiar with these medical societies, you're the treasurer, and the next year the secretary, the next year you're the this vice speaker, then you're the speaker, and then eventually you're the president or the chair. Like after 6 years, you sort of just. It's like an automatic, once you get elected, the first step, you just kind of work your way up. Well, he decided just to run for president, saying, I'm going to end this craziness that we have with the American Board of Pediatrics, and he won easily. And then he got there and he realized, and he was unable to do anything. And became captured by the organization because they probably said, we're going to go bankrupt if we don't, continue to support the board fleecing our physicians. And so the people who were there ostensibly to protect physicians and their specialty are actually out there just as much involved in stealing your money as the board of certification is. And so it is for many reasons depressing. I know that there was the lawsuit that Wes Fisher spearheaded, and that was, I guess you'd say it's unsuccessful, right? It was thrown out because of standing reasons? I'm not quite sure. And if you don't know, that's okay. But
no, I'm not familiar. I'm familiar with it, but I don't know any of the.
Right.
I didn't follow all the legal twists and turns, and it sounded like the ruling was on a technicality or couldn't be used as precedent or something. I don't know what that means from a legal standpoint, but it sounded like a setback.
Yeah. When it comes to following these outrageous things because I think what the ABIM had offshore accounts, they were basically hiding money, right? They were
Cayman Islands.
Right.
How much more entertaining can this get? Then in June of 2016, right 2 weeks before, I gave a presentation at the American Medical Association with my theory of this new mock program being a bail, that ABIM was in a slow motion death spiral, and that this program launched in 2014 was a disguised bailout scheme, which I wanted to just come back to in a minute. They filed their tax returns, and then buried deep into the foundation's tax returns, page 38 or something, I thought, wow, what's this? Cayman Islands, Ugland House, which is a famous, there's like 20,000 businesses registered at this one house in a location building in the Cayman Islands. I think Obama even brought it up at some point during a campaign. It's like, holy shit, are they that stupid? Yes, it was through a partnership. It wasn't ABM Foundation directly writing a check, but don't they know this partnership is invested in the Cayman Islands? So $6 million of their dollars eventually was allocated to these Cayman Island investments. Dr. Fisher and I, were both apoplectic about it at that point. But to the point of, I just wanted to close the loop on the theory. I don't know if you've read Kurt Eichenwald. He wrote a very thorough 4-piece article on ABIM and the maintenance and certification controversy. He said why is ABIM pushing so hard on mock? He said it's at danger of becoming a financial corpse. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
He could see it right away. And I thought, okay, he has a lot of experience investigating scams, maybe even early on with Enron. The question has come up, did their bailout scheme work, right? And you go on my Twitter feed right now, you'll see, I looked at the numbers because the question has come up, did this scheme work? Did this bail them out? And yes, it did bail them out. Certification revenue for new docs was down about 20 million since 2013, and mock revenue was up. They saw that in their projections. We're going bankrupt. We're spending more money than we have coming in. We need to do something. They're going down. So the mock revenue really kicked in the year 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, where they're up. Mock revenue over the baseline year of 2013 is up nearly 40 million. So certification revenues down 20, mock revenues up 40. So they're basically mock saved their asses, even though they're still not at the value that they were in the year 2000. They're on a consolidated basis, they're worth net assets, they call it, or net equity for equivalent of private company. They're at about 40 million. They're still 22 million below their 2000 level, which is just hard to get my mind around after all this money that's come in over the last 22 years. They're still not where they were at. But anyhow, I wanted your audience to know, yes, the bailout scheme was, I hate to say unfortunately, but I mean, it worked. I think the docs knew, okay, this is going to work because the money's going to be, coming into their coffers.
I guess, I feel like the same amount of physicians are coming out of training every year. And so why were they losing so much money in the certification process, the initial certification? So when you said certification, you're talking about the initial certification. When you finish your residency,
Right.
you take a test. My specialty, you take a test and you do an oral exam. Some, surgeons, they do other things. But so there's that part. And then there's the maintenance part, which is, everybody's doing it. Why were they suddenly losing money? People suddenly more expensive taking the test? Were they just administrative costs ballooned for some reason? Do you have an idea for why they needed a bailout?
I don't have, obviously, I don't have access to their internal records. Their certification revenue peaked a little bit over 30 million. Again, I don't keep the numbers in my head.
Sure.
I would have gone the same years ago, but it was around 32 million in the year 2013. And then it dropped around mid-20s. So it dropped 2014, 2015, 2016. I'm talking just the certification revenue went down. It cumulatively from 2013, it's down 20 million. I don't know what it's a combination of bodies and feet, whatever the dynamic, whatever the factors that go into the formula of generating that revenue for them, but it went down.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they knew that, for whatever reason.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure the demographics, they say, oh, we're getting more foreign medical grads, or we have more people who aren't sitting for their internal medicine boards. They're just going straight to the specialty boards, for instance, or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but we've got these, we've got Dr. Fisher and his friends. They'll we'll charge them the mock fee. We've got this other pool of candidates to pick up the slack in the initial certification revenue. So yes, the scheme did work. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
To be honest, I was hoping they would be insolvent, where liabilities would exceed assets. But that was maybe my more vindictive South Side of Chicago coming out. We'll nail. They're toast now. But it's sad because it's been around since 1936. Was very once well respected from what people have told me, and it's just sad to see this organization kind of self-destruct, at least from a PR's point of view. For me, speaking as a patient,
Yeah.
and from my non-physician perspective with the work that I'm doing.
So when you're filing these pieces, I think we've well documented the crookedness. I guess I'd almost say criminal, but I won't say criminal for the American Board of Internal Medicine. I think everything they did was legal, but really not very moral. Are there other boards that are operating the same thing, or you found things, maybe either of you found things that happened to other places you're like, wow, this is outrageous?
Yeah, I mentioned the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. They're the number one moneymaker among all the boards. They're making profits, tax-free profits, around 10 million a year. We talked about the American Board of Pediatrics. Their maintenance of certification revenue is ballooning. If you go into my Twitter feed, you can see this outrageous jump in certification revenue that then helped feed. Don't show your wife that tweet. She may not sleep. They then shoveled money into their retirement plan. So, they have this kind of situation. Okay, what do we do with all this money? We're tax-free, don't have to pay taxes. So, they're maximizing retirement contributions, building the Taj Mahal in the case of psychiatry and neurology. The other board that's disturbing that I think your listeners need to be aware of is the American Board of Surgery. I haven't really dug into them too much. I'm seeing some of the same disturbing things with them. Their retirement plan is now worth twice. It's worth $15 million. Is worth twice the value of the board, which is worth about $7 million. The board has been around since 1937. So wrap your mind around that concept. This retirement plan, a pension plan, was set up in the 50s for the American Board of Surgery, but then they also have a 401k plan. This board has been around forever. FDR was president. And, here the retirement plan is worth twice. There's more money in the retirement plan than in the board itself. The other thing, that's very disturbing to me to see that. The other piece with American Board of Surgery was there was a $1.4 million, some type of a severance payment to the former CEO. 1.4 million. I had never seen that with the boards. And it was paid in 2 installments of 700,000. That's the stuff that's troubling to me. Is it illegal? No. It's fully reported. I'm sure there was some type of a contractual obligation for severance pay of some type. I don't know the story behind it. So that's disturbing. Also at the American Board of Genetics and Genomics, did I pronounce that correctly?
Could be.
Did I come close? I don't know. Liz is correcting me. She says, "Oh, you're talking like a Chicagoan again." They took $1 million. There's some type of wire fraud loss of $1 million that I tripped over by accident. What? It's funny. Yeah, I don't. There was the Department of Justice indicted a bunch of people relating to genetic testing. There was a scheme going on with some sleazy people that were, I think, selling genetic tests or billing Medicare, some type of scheme where they were bilking senior citizens, billing Medicare and so on. There was a number of indictments handed down. I don't know if the American Board of Genetics and Genomics was involved in that, or if this $1 million loss was somehow connected to that scheme. Did they get sweet talked by some con man that, hey, invest in this thing? And then, but they ate $1 million. Now you think, well, $1 million here, $1 million there. At ABIM, that's pocket change, but that's significant. At a small board like that, it represented, I think, almost half of their value. I mean, that could have easily bankrupted them. So anyhow, those are kind of the issues that I'm seeing. Is the American Board of Pediatrics, the American Board of Family Medicine is also playing clever. Clever reporting of they shipped $7 million to their foundation. You brought up foundations a while back. They joined the foundation club. Maybe they have all these foundations have bowling teams, or they quietly shipped $7 million out the back door. I don't think ABIM ever shipped $7 million in 1 year, and they tried to hide it. I shouldn't say they tried to hide it. It would appear that they were trying to obfuscate it. Liz can remind me how to pronounce that word after the show. It's stuff like that that's very troubling. It's like, okay, do they think no one's looking at this, or they think they're that clever? I don't get it.
I mean, it very much is like laundering money in some ways, right? It's like, you get your casino revenue and then you funnel it through a car wash and make it look legitimate.
Right. So, if the board's saying, well, the docs don't respect us, respect is earned. When you're playing games like this, okay, maybe there's explanations for what the American Board of Family Medicine is doing, reporting it incorrectly. I'm all ears in terms of why they're reporting these transfers to related organizations the way they are. And I'm open to their side of the story, but why is it being reported this way? Are they trying to hide these transfers? They're funneling millions of dollars over to their foundation. I would be quite upset if I was a family medicine doc.
The thing that is most upsetting to me is in your initial example, when you said you took on a healthcare system or a payment system, insurance system in Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
You had plenty of people who found your story credible, who found it interesting, and who wanted to go after those guys because they were, the insurance companies have been wearing a black hat for a long time, right? I mean, people are more than happy to go after them, or there are a couple of organizations or types of people that big corporations, right? These are essentially big corporations, so you think there'd be a lot of hostility from the press towards them, but they slap, well, I'm nonprofit, I'm actually an educational organization, I'm just here for certification. And they really are treated in so many ways as with kid gloves or at least with a lot of credulity by the press. And I find it really frustrating because you look at these actions and you're like, how can you look at this and not think there's something really crooked? And that it seems like to be a very compelling story that is not that complicated to tell. Right. I mean, it's
very simple.
You're not going through like 8 steps where you finally steal money. It's like, we're sending money to a slush fund. Oh, by the way, we have a fully funded retirement account. And by the way, no one else in America has this. Even other public employees really don't have this sort of pension program.
Right. Correct.
And yet, for some reason, we're thinking that this is okay or it's not a story. it would seem very much a story. But is it because maybe no one likes physicians, or they think they make plenty of money, and so who cares about them? Maybe that's it. I don't know. But that's the part I find the most frustrating, because you can't get any traction to put any pressure on these organizations. I don't know if they pay off the right politicians. I'm not sure, but it's frustrating.
Yeah. Some of the executives do make political donations. I've told people from the get-go I'm apolitical. I don't have a political agenda. I didn't want them thinking, well, is there some hidden agenda? Or you were an ex-employee of a board and you had a parting of ways and you have an axe to grind. No, nothing. I did it really, for the fun and the entertainment of it. It's been a wild ride. But to your point on the media, yes, it is frustrating. I do give Rosenthal, Eichenwald credit for jumping into this story. What's frustrating for us is that, I'll look in my Twitter, my DMs, as I go, where's the DM from a reporter saying, hey, I'm investigating the American Board of Surgery. I'm looking at these obscene profits, that's my word, and they are, I think, at the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. Is that not a story? I have a feeling that there's been a consolidation in the media world, that they're afraid because of threats to advertising revenue. I've had this conversation in my head now for 7 years. Where's the press? Why is this guy, this accountant guy, and his beautiful assistant, going after them? Where's the media on this story? Either traditional healthcare media. My fear is that this topic is too hot to touch. And for whatever reason, for political reasons, maybe there's influence. I'm at a loss.
Yeah. I can't figure it out. The only thing I could say is that if you could reframe it and say, here are these basically these companies that aren't paying any tax, right? I mean, there's plenty of people who are excited to have people pay more taxes. And so maybe that you can get some people in the media, when you have executives pulling down millions of dollars and no tax nothing being put back into the state coffers or federal coffers. I don't know.
Right. What's interesting, what I found out recently, I need to do a little digging, just a footnote to all this. ABMS, I was looking at ABMS's 990, and, you got to really kind of go line by line. It become pretty mind-numbing. But it looks like because they set up some goofy thing in Singapore or something. I don't know if you're familiar with that. There's some doctors are really upset. It's like, why are they selling these services? They're going global. I do think they have to pay tax. They're paying more taxes. They're paying taxes to the state of Singapore, than they are to Illinois, where they're headquartered, or the U.S. I assume. It's just, the whole thing seems totally goofed up.
Can you briefly talk about the ABMS? Because we've been talking about the specific specialty boards. What is the relationship of the American Board of Medical Specialties, which is the umbrella organization?
Yes.
And how do they get funding? Because they don't have, I'm not board certified with ABMS. Is my board paying them money to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. There's about 7 or 8 different buckets of revenue that are pouring into ABMS. I'm working on updating those numbers for 2019. I do recently, in the last week or so, have ABMS's 2019 tax returns. So there's about 7 sources of revenue. The primary source is, again, I'm talking off the top of my head, but I think it's fairly accurate, is the membership dues that they're collecting from the other boards.
Yeah.
They have their other significant, investment income, that's typical, that's normal stuff. They do have some miscellaneous revenue, maybe dues and subscriptions of some type, maybe publications. But and this is an issue that Dr. Fisher has been tracking in more detail than I have. They set up a for-profit company, ABMS Solutions, I believe, headquartered maybe in Georgia, I'm not sure. That showed, according to their filing, 0 revenue in the year 2012. They're now pushing $6 million. They're pushing $6 million or $7 million in 2019. And what they're doing is selling I'm assuming that they're selling the physician's data. The issue that Dr. Fisher and others are freaking out about, it's like, okay, do these docs realize their data is being sold?
Right. And that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, because one of the things that I've served a long time on one of the credentialing committees in our hospital. I wasn't on the physician end; I was in the mid-level providers. But essentially, the credentialing part of the hospitals, they just want easy access to information to verify who people are. And so these specialty societies say, "Hey, we'll do that for you." And I don't know if they do it for free. I wouldn't doubt if they are pretty much free, and then they extract the money from the docs to pay for that service to give to the access to hospitals, for their database or whatever it is. So I imagine that's how that works. But you can definitely see how the ABMS, I don't know how they charge the specialist societies, but certainly if they say we want some percentage of what you get from each member, then it is absolutely to their advantage to push as much of this MOC stuff through all the different specialties to jack up the revenue in order to increase their revenue, especially since they're even less accountable than the specialty societies.
Yeah, see, at the end of the day, I'm sure you would agree with me. I don't care, if it's a legitimate business, like a testing business, they pay taxes, I don't care what they pay their executives, they're paying taxes and they're offering services or something that there must be some demand for it. But, what's troubling is that these are nonprofits, which certainly seem to be scheming and playing accounting games when they can or think they can get away with it. That's what's troubling.
Well, if this hasn't raised the blood pressure of all the physicians listening, you've got
nothing will, right?
You've got some great antihypertensive meds.
Yeah, thank you.
So I want to thank you guys for being on the show. If people want to follow more about what you're doing, I mean, obviously go to the Wikimoke. Where do they follow you on social media, and where do they find out more stuff about this?
My Twitter handle, or our Twitter handle, is Charles P. Kroll, at Charles P. Kroll, Kroll. Wikimock.org is the homepage. I would like to send out an appeal. We're in the process of raising funds to update the 2018 report with new numbers. If any of your listeners are interested in anonymously or publicly sponsoring, it's a great way to get even. If I don't have a problem with that. If revenge is your motive, I'm with you 100%. Or just I think it'll be a great service to the physician community to get these numbers out there as soon as possible for 2019. So your listeners can contact me through wikimock.org. It's been a challenge, the lack of media interest, scrutiny other than Rosenthal and Eichenwald.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear in the physician community that I get people looking at my profile almost one per minute, believe it or not, my Twitter profile. So people are looking at our stuff frequently, but I don't get the followers. I think they're afraid, okay, if my employer sees I'm following this guy, I'm going to get called into HR. It's just shocking to me that there's, I don't want to read too much into that, but it's strange. I'm getting one profile view almost every second, yet where are the followers?
Yeah.
So I haven't followed. I'm being shadow followed. And that shows you, I think that speaks to the level of fear within the physician community. We just started investigating the medical ed boards, the Federation of State Medical Boards, the American Association of...
Yeah, AAMC, I think is what...
Right. I'm kind of new to this game, the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Educated. I'm starting to dig into those boards. That's a whole opening up a new front. And, these young kids that are saddled, I know, most physicians are paying off their debt or, recently got it paid off. These young kids that are really upset with what's going on, when I show them that Federation of State Medical Boards just bought Colombia's former embassy in Washington, D.C. They paid over list price, $5 million, whatever the amount was, 27-bedroom mansion in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, these kids are thinking, I can't even afford Starbucks. And this is the type of bullshit that's going on with these medical ed boards.
What appeal would you make? Because I think probably about half my listeners are non-physicians. So what is your appeal to people who aren't in medicine? Why should they care? I mean, what do you think? What difference does it make to them that physicians are paying extra money to these medical boards that are crooked?
Yeah, I think the broad appeal, and some people have argued that the media doesn't jump into the mock issue because it's, I've been told by a journalist that, oh, that's inside baseball stuff. The public doesn't want to, their eyes glaze over and they think, yeah, so what?
Yeah.
These are rich doctors, that thing. I think that the appeal to the public, the wider public, these are organizations that are masquerading as nonprofits and functioning as for-profits, and they're not paying any taxes. And for me personally, as far as the mock issue, my primary care physician in Minnesota in her prime, at Park Nicollet, a large system, well-respected system in Minnesota, she quit medicine in part because of all these, I couldn't get an appointment. She's preparing for the mock, it does have people think, well, it doesn't affect me. Yes, it does affect you. I lost my very good physician. I was really upset about that, in part, not entirely, but in part due to the testing requirement. The broad issue is the corruption, what I would describe as these corrupt nonprofits, should be of concern to the public.
Yeah.
Do you have what are your thoughts on that?
I would say I had no idea what mock was until I jumped into the research and analyzing the data. And I was astounded by the level of corruption that I was seeing, or what I viewed as corruption in these numbers. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is outrageous. I can't wrap my head around it. So I was an extreme outsider, as many of the patients and regular public in your audience are. And I couldn't understand either why this story was not being picked up. Unfathomable to me, and the lack of ethics I was seeing in what should be an ethical foundation.
Yeah, and I think, that is probably the best statement on it of all, because these are also run by physicians who are in academic medicine, who are the ones training our physicians, our residents, and medical students. And they're the ones who ultimately end up leading these organizations. And they are, they're just extortion rackets, and they have to know on some level what they are. And that is probably the most disappointing thing, that our profession has people like this who are just robbing us. So I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Keep up the good work. We'll obviously recommend people to look into more of the work. If you are a physician and you have a specialty, which of course you do, you can go to that wiki mock page and find all the, make sure you're seated. Maybe have a drink first, so you're a little mellow before you look at the page, before you look at the compensation, how much extra money these boards are bilking from you. But I highly recommend you check that out, because it's good to come in and you will get other physicians. Like I said, you'll have every physician on your side, because everyone thinks it's a crooked scheme. Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. I would just, if they want, I would recommend a blood pressure pill.
Yeah.
First, would go to my Twitter feed. You could find, real-time current numbers, and, which are worse or as worse or worser as than
more worser.
It's just mind-blowing. The responses I get from these docs is like, wow, This is unbelievable. I can't believe this is happening.
It is one of the things that makes me the most discouraged about medicine when I enter this topic. So I try not to talk about it too much, but it is very important. So thanks again.
All right, thank you.
Thanks again to Chuck Kroll and Liz Tremblay. Before we end, don't forget to reach out to Larry Keller of Physician Financial Services for your disability insurance needs. He's been around for a while in many physician communities, helping them with their coverage they need. Find Larry at drpodcastnetwork.com/Larry Keller.
Thanks for listening to The Paradox. If you like what the doc is doing, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher. And share the show with your friends. Become a supporting listener to get access to special bonuses at patreon.com/theparadox. Show notes can be found at theparadox.com.